My name is Madeline Stone, and I'll never forget the day my world broke. It was just an ordinary morning, or it was supposed to be, until the phone rang. Jake, my husband, was gone. A freak car accident, they said. Just like that, my life was turned upside down, and I was left to figure out how to breathe again. I stood there, holding my phone in my hand, not knowing what to do next. Everything around me blurred, like I was underwater, unable to catch my breath. My chest tightened. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. Jake was dead. The man I had built my life with, the father of my son, was gone. And just like that, my world felt empty. But I had to focus on Leo, our 7-year-old son. He was the only thing that mattered. He hadn't spoken a word since he heard the news. His silence was deafening, and I didn't know how to fix it. I couldn't even fix myself. In a panic, I called my father. I needed someone. I needed comfort. I needed a shoulder to lean on. But instead of compassion, I was met with indifference. "We're hosting Ava's Sweet 16 tonight," he said, his voice curt. "Don't ruin the mood, Maddie. Call us tomorrow." Tomorrow? Tomorrow? Did he hear me? Did he understand what had just happened? My husband was dead, and I was left to face the pain alone. But apparently, Ava's birthday was more important than my grief. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I just hung up. Alone. I buried Jake a few days later, in a haze of numbness. And yet, my father, my flesh and blood, was posting photos of Ava's party. The balloons, the laughter, the sweetest girl ever in gold. The contrast between their celebration and my broken heart felt like a slap in the face. I didn't know how to process it, how to make sense of it. All I knew was, I was utterly alone in this world. The days after Jake's death felt like I was floating in a fog. My body moved through them, but I wasn't really there. Leo still wouldn't speak. He didn't even look at me, not in the way he used to. I could see the fear in his eyes, the confusion. He was trying to make sense of the world. But how was I supposed to help him when I didn't know how to help myself? Every night, I'd find myself staring at the walls of our empty house. Jake wasn't coming back. The weight of that truth hit me harder each time I woke up and faced another day without him. I'd tried to keep things normal for Leo, but nothing felt normal. Not without Jake's laugh, not without his touch, not without his presence. And all the while, my father and stepmother just disappeared. I couldn't understand it. I thought family was supposed to be there for you, especially when you're grieving. But they weren't. Ava's Sweet 16 had passed, but nothing had changed. They didn't check on me, didn't ask if I needed anything. And when I tried to reach out, I was met with silence. I remember one afternoon, sitting on the couch, trying to gather the strength to pick up the phone again. I called my father, but it felt so pointless. He picked up, and I could hear the noise of people in the background. It sounded like they were getting ready for another event. "Maddie," he said, his voice flat. "How are you holding up? Everything's fine here, just busy with Ava's new projects. Maybe I'll come by next week." "Next week," he'd say. "Next week." But what did that mean for me right now? I needed him now, not next week. And what hurt the most was that I knew he wouldn't come. Not really. Because I wasn't the priority. Not when Ava was. Not when her milestones mattered more than my broken heart. I spent those first few weeks of grief feeling like I was drowning in a sea of loneliness. No one came to check on me. No one called to offer their condolences, their love. It was as if the world had moved on, and I was left behind, forgotten. I watched the days pass from my kitchen window, feeling the coldness seep in with every glance at the empty chair where Jake should have been. Leo and I would sit in silence, eating dinner or watching TV, both of us pretending that everything was fine, even though it wasn't. I kept hoping that something would change, that my father would realize how badly I needed him, how desperately I needed some kind of connection, but it never happened. The messages from my father remained shallow. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. But it was always too late, and it never felt sincere. He was busy with Ava. Always busy. It was like I didn't exist outside of his role as the doting father to his stepdaughter, the one he had chosen over me. His words were hollow. I didn't need empty promises. I needed a father. But he was too wrapped up in his new life to remember what it meant to be there for me. One day I reached a breaking point. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The pain, the loneliness, the betrayal, it all poured out in a wave of anger. I lashed out in a message to my father, telling him everything I felt. That I was grieving, that I was falling apart, and yet he was nowhere to be found. I was suffocating, and he had no idea. The response came later that evening. Don't make it about yourself. Ava needs us. I read the words over and over, as if trying to make sense of them. Don't make it about myself. I had just buried my husband, and he was telling me I couldn't even grieve. Ava's needs, they always came first. And somewhere, deep inside, I felt the last shred of connection with my father die. 2 weeks passed. Each day felt like I was walking through a storm, only to wake up and find that the rain was still pouring. Jake's absence was a constant ache, a raw reminder that life had gone from predictable to painfully uncertain. And in all that pain, I didn't know how to move forward, how to get my feet under me again. I had been in a fog, numb to everything around me. But eventually, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office, my hands trembling in my lap. The will, reading. It was a formality, right? I wasn't expecting much. Jake had always been practical, never one for extravagant surprises. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something more than just paperwork. The lawyer cleared his throat. Madeline, Leo, he began. Jake left behind something for both of you. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. I wasn't prepared for the news that would come next, the shock that would follow. Jake had always been one step ahead, it seemed, always thinking of what might come when he was gone. The lawyer handed me an envelope. I held it like it was a lifeline, wondering if Jake had written me something to make me feel less alone. The letter inside was personal, his familiar handwriting filling the page. But what I didn't expect, what I wasn't prepared for, was the news that came after. Jake had invested in a tech startup, secretly. Before the accident, he'd put aside shares and the value had skyrocketed. He had left me and Leo more money than I ever thought possible. It wasn't just a financial windfall. It was Jake's way of making sure we were set. His quiet, thoughtful way of taking care of us even after he was gone. It was overwhelming. I wanted to feel gratitude, but instead, all I felt was a hollow emptiness. No amount of money could bring Jake back. No amount of wealth could fill the space he left behind. But the lawyer wasn't done yet. I sat there, holding the letter from Jake, my fingers frozen on the paper. It was all so surreal. The numbers, the amount of money, it didn't feel real. But as the lawyer explained the details of the shares, the growth, and the inheritance, I could hear the clock ticking in my mind. I couldn't focus on the wealth. Not yet. I couldn't even bring myself to be grateful. Leo was still silent. His eyes, dark and distant, flicked over to me every so often, but he said nothing. I could feel the weight of his quiet, the sadness that seemed to hang around us like an invisible cloud. I tried to hold it together for him, but my mind kept drifting back to Jake. This money. It wasn't what I needed. I needed him. But the truth was, Jake had always planned ahead. He'd always been the one to make sure I had what I needed, even when he wasn't physically there. His foresight, his love, the way he'd prepared for a future without him. It was all in these shares, in this money. I didn't know how to feel. It was too much, too overwhelming. On one hand, it was a blessing. I was secure. Leo was secure. We could live comfortably, never worry about bills or the future, but on the other hand, it felt wrong. It felt like a cruel joke. Money couldn't replace what I'd lost. It couldn't bring Jake back. It couldn't fix the hole in my heart. But it was Jake's way of taking care of me from beyond the grave. I knew that. And as much as it stung, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude, too. A small, bittersweet sense of peace. Then the lawyer reached for another envelope. I glanced at the second envelope the lawyer held out to me, my heart racing. It was smaller than the first, plain and simple, but it carried an unfamiliar weight. A letter from Jake. My hands shook as I reached for it, but I didn't open it right away. I was afraid of what I might find. Had he written this before the accident? Was it something personal, just for me? Or was there something else in it? Something I hadn't expected? The lawyer cleared his throat again. "Madeline, this letter was prepared for you," he said softly. It's something Jake asked to be read only if certain circumstances occurred." "Circumstances?" I whispered, my throat tight. "What do you mean?" The lawyer hesitated, looking between me and the letter in his hands. "Jake foresaw that there might be a time when you'd need support, but that support might not come from the people you expected." My chest tightened. A knot formed in my stomach. The words felt heavy, like they carried more than just a simple message. With a deep breath, I tore open the envelope. The paper inside felt cool, crisp, but it wasn't the kind of message I had been hoping for. Jake's familiar handwriting filled the page, but the words weren't about love or how much he missed me. They were something else. "Maddie," it began, "if you're reading this, then things didn't go as I'd hoped. I've written this because I know there's a possibility that the people you love might fail you when you need them so most. And I'm sorry that I'm not here to protect you from that." I blinked, feeling the sting of tears, but I kept reading. I could barely breathe as I read Jake's words. His letter wasn't just a final farewell. It was a warning, a preemptive strike against the hurt I'd already felt, and the hurt that was yet to come. Jake had known, somehow, that I would be left to carry the weight of my grief alone. And he had a plan. "Madeline," Jake's letter continued, "I want you to know that I love you. I always have, and I always will. But I also know the way your father is. I know how he has always prioritized Ava's needs above yours. And I need you to understand this, because I might not be around to protect you when it happens. If you find yourself alone, if you find your family turning away when you need them most, I need you to know that you are stronger than you think. You are stronger than they could ever realize." I stopped reading for a moment. The words stung, like salt on an open wound, but I couldn't stop myself from reading further. The lawyer remained silent, his eyes on the paper in his hands, giving me space to absorb the weight of Jake's words. "I know," the letter continued, "that your father will disappoint you. He will choose Ava's happiness over your grief. I've seen it happen before. When he asked me to take out a second mortgage to fund Ava's birthday party, I said no. And I told him that if he ever chose a party over your pain, he would lose me. And he would lose you. But I want you to know this, Maddie. If he chooses a party over your pain, you will become stronger without him. But don't let him come crawling back. He will try. And when he does, you need to remember this. He will never be the father you deserve." The words hit me like a hammer, each sentence leaving me more raw than the last. Jake had known. He had seen it coming. He had predicted the very thing I had feared, that my father's indifference would hurt me in ways I hadn't even imagined. As Jake's letter ended, a strange silence fell over the room. My hands were shaking as I held the letter, the words echoing in my mind. I could hear Jake's voice, clear and strong, in every line. And then I looked up at the lawyer, whose face had softened. "Madeline," he said gently, "there's more." The weight of the words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure I could take any more revelations, but the lawyer handed me another envelope. This one was thick, heavier, and as I opened it, the final blow came. Inside was another letter, a second one from Jake. And in it, he revealed the full extent of what had been happening behind closed doors. The things my father had said. The things I had never known. My breath caught in my throat as I read, the words like a dagger to my chest. Jake had written about a conversation he'd had with my father long before his death. He described a moment when my father had asked him for help, a second mortgage to fund Ava's birthday party. Jake had refused, and he had made it clear to my father that if he ever chose a party over the pain of his wife, it would change everything. But what really shook me was Jake's final warning. "If you choose a party over my wife's pain, she will become stronger without you. But don't come crawling back. She will never forget." The full weight of that moment hit me. My father had asked Jake to take out a second mortgage for Ava's birthday, and instead of protecting me, instead of supporting me, my father had pushed me aside, just as I'd feared. It wasn't just that he'd been distant. He had actively chosen Ava, over and over, at the expense of me and my grief. And now, I was left to deal with the fallout. Alone. The room was silent, the weight of Jake's words pressing down on me like 1,000 pounds. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the anger, the betrayal, everything I had been holding in for. Weeks, everything I had tried to bury, came rushing to the surface. I looked up at the lawyer, then at the family around me. My father sitting there like a stone, his face unreadable, as if the bombshell had never dropped. My stepmother's eyes flickered nervously, but no one said anything. No one spoke up. The silence was deafening, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. Jake had known. He had seen this coming. And in the midst of my grief, he had left me the one thing I needed more than anything. Strength. The strength to stand up for myself, to stop being the quiet one, the one who let others walk all over her. I could feel it, the quiet resilience building inside me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a grand declaration or a fight. It was a deep, quiet realization that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need my father's love to validate me. I didn't need my stepmother's understanding. And I certainly didn't need Ava's birthday party to be more important than my pain. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. The weight of the moment felt heavy, but I didn't falter. I looked at my father, the man who had chosen a party over my grief, the man who had failed me when I needed him most. His face was pale, his lips tight, but he didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer any kind of explanation, but I didn't need him to. I was done asking for permission. I was done waiting for them to choose me. The room was still. My father's eyes were wide, and the rest of the family remained frozen in place, staring at me like I was someone they didn't recognize. It didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity, a sense of self I hadn't known I had lost. I walked out of that lawyer's office without saying another word. The silence that followed felt different now. It wasn't the silence of grief, or of abandonment. It was the silence of me taking control, of choosing myself, of realizing I no longer needed their approval to define my worth. Leo hadn't said a word since Jake's death, but when I looked at him, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. A glimmer of hope, maybe. A tiny spark that told me he was seeing me, the real me, for the first time in what felt like forever. And for him, I would keep going. For him, I would rise above everything I had lost. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when I felt like I was drowning again, when the weight of it all would hit me like a wave. But in that moment, as I walked away from my father's cold silence, I understood something I hadn't before. I was stronger than I ever realized. The betrayal, the abandonment, it didn't define me anymore. My grief didn't define me. I did. And I would never forget how my father had chosen a party over my pain. But now, I knew what Jake had meant. I had become stronger without him, and I was never going to let anyone make me feel small again.